host. I want to kick this off first of all by saying I'm a little bit under the weather, so apologies for like the congestion and how I look. A little tired, but I'm very excited for tonight's live. We are going to be featuring Danielle from Sex Ed with DB. She was recently featured in the Principles of Pleasure documentary on Netflix. If you have not seen it, would 10 out of 10 recommend. It's great and super informative. Yeah, so we're gonna get started in about a minute. I'm gonna have Danielle jump on, but before we get started, as per usual, just some housekeeping things. Feel free to comment with any questions you may have. Obviously, keep it appropriate, keep it respectful, but this is gonna be pretty unfiltered, so nothing is a stupid question, and that is about that. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Danielle on, and there we go. Perfect.
Hello.
Hi, Danielle. How are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
Good. I'm so excited to have you on here. This is like such a fun topic, and I think a lot of people will benefit from this conversation. So, yeah,
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invite. I'm stoked.
Absolutely.
I love Pandia. Partnered with y'all in the past, so really excited to be back for another collab.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Yeah, we're very obsessed with you and your TikTok and all of the work that we do. Yeah, I don't want to I feel like I won't do you justice. So if you want to give a brief introduction of who you are, what Sex Ed with DB is, and just anything else you'd like to share, that'd be perfect.
Sure, no problem. I'm Danielle, DB, she, her pronouns. I am the creator, the executive producer, and the host of the Sex Ed with DB podcast. And I thank you, Fat Megan Fox. Thank you so much for
Oh no. Okay, looks like we have a little technical difficulty. I am going to wait till Danielle comes back. I think the Wi-Fi connection is a little bit off, but that's totally fine. But in the meantime, some other fun things about Danielle. So she has a really cool TikTok, Sex Ed with DB, and she does so many responses to videos, like with just like her facial expressions are hilarious. I'll let her explain that. But anyway, let's see if this works again. There we go. Okay.
I have no idea what happened. I'm sorry. It just said I didn't even touch anything, and it just said, "Oh, thanks, you had your live."
Oh, great. You are still frozen, but I can hear you.
Oh no. Okay.
So maybe we just like wait it out, and I'll have you keep talking, and
Okay.
yeah, we'll see what happens. Unless you want to like unjoin and then rejoin, we can do that too.
Okay, let me try one more time. I'll do that.
Perfect. Yeah, no problem. Okay, we're gonna try this again. Would not be a real talk if there were not technical difficulties. So that's just what's happening here. But in the meantime, comment where you're coming from or where you're viewing this from. I'm in Washington, D.C. If anyone's in Washington, D.C., shout out to you. I hope the allergies are not killing you. Love the cherry blossoms, but they really get me sometimes. So there's that. Okay, we're gonna try this one more time. Let's see what happens. And yeah, feel free to comment any questions you have as well. It'll be a little easier once we start talking, but there you are. Perfect.
Okay. I hope that
now.
I stay. Amazing.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, thanks for the feedback. It sounded like watching from the Bible Belt. Amazing. California, lovely. I'm in Brooklyn. I heard your question.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Let me redo my intro real quick for those who are new or for who already heard this. Sorry, but I'm Danielle, DB, she, her pronouns. I'm the creator, executive producer, and host of the Sex Ed with DB podcast. We are a feminist podcast bringing you all the sex ed that you never got through unique and entertaining storytelling, aiming to center LGBTQ and BIPOC experts. And so, as you mentioned, I was just featured in The Principles of Pleasure on Netflix, which is a docuseries all about pleasure. It's kind of a really fun pop science 3-part docuseries. Totally check it out if it's available in your country or where you're at. And yeah, I've been doing the podcast for almost 5 years. We're in the middle of our 6th season. And as you mentioned, I have a TikTok and an Instagram, and I'm a content creator. So that's what I do.
Yes, love the TikTok. Your reactions to people's posts are so funny. I love it.
Thank you.
No, it's really great. And yeah, congrats on being featured in the Principles of Pleasure. That's awesome. We have a Netflix debut. Love that. And I started watching it the other day. It's very informative. I was laughing so hard at the part where there's just like a table of sex toys.
Oh yeah, Dirty Lola.
That. Yes, she was so great at explaining everything. I was like, I don't even know what that is, but now
she
I know
actually
everything.
is going to be on tomorrow's episode for my podcast.
Okay.
So tune in if you were into Dirty Lola. She is incredible.
She's amazing. Yeah, she explained everything so well. I was like, love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it. We have a lot of topics. Well, not a lot of topics to cover. We only have 3, but I feel like we kind of jump from place to place. When I was talking with my team about what we should chat with you about, there were so many things that came up because like Danielle's the expert, the sexpert. So I wrote that in my post and it got taken down. So
Instagram is just simply the worst. I mean, it's not just them, it's all social platforms really have a problem with sex educators sharing medically accurate, inclusive information. So we kind of have to scoot our way around the algorithm sometimes.
We got to filter it out. But yeah, this is unfiltered. So hopefully no one just like cuts us out. Well, that might have been what they were trying to do before, but
I mean, someone might be watching. Who knows? Very scary.
They might be. We're gonna keep it going though. So first question. I feel like this is a really good one. What would you recommend as some helpful ways to teach sex ed in school? I feel like for me, it was like, you're sitting on the rug in middle school with all the girls in your class with like the gym teacher teaching. It's literally like Mean Girls, and it's not the most helpful. So if you have any tips on that, like what age you should start talking about it, if a school setting is even like maybe the most appropriate setting for it, and if you also want to touch on how to create an inclusive environment for that. It was a lot, but
sure. No, I have a lot to say on that. Absolutely. Yeah, so absolutely school is the appropriate environment for young people to be learning about sex ed. If kids are going to school, they should be learning age appropriate sex education. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you're teaching kindergartners about dildos? No, that doesn't mean that. It means more so that you're teaching 5 and 6-year-olds what it's like to be a good friend and a good family member, and how to share and how to set your own boundaries with your body, how to know the names of your body parts, really basic stuff that young people, especially kids, should have access to. So my opinion and the opinion of experts in the field is that K through 12 is the appropriate time to have age appropriate, medically accurate sex education. Is that a reality? Absolutely not. Most states do not require medically accurate sex education. In fact, I believe the number, even though we're improving, is still less than half of the 50 states that we have. And so in terms of how to make it inclusive and how to make sure that all genders and sexual orientations and races and bodies are, able to be represented, it really just comes down to, are you representing those folks in your curriculum? So I think when you're showing pictures of a vulva, are you only showing a white person's vulva? Or maybe are you showing also a Black person's vulva or an Asian person's vulva? When you are talking about sex, are you also talking about queer sex? Are you also talking about the fact that queer sex and straight sex, quote unquote, everyone has the same parts and is having the same kinds of sex, regardless of their parts? We all have the same, holes and the same genitals. And, so I think it's really important to recognize the fact that there are ways through our curriculum that we can make sure that folks feel included. My last example I'll give is when you're talking about how people are engaging in relationships. Are you being ableist, or are you showing examples of folks who are in interabled relationships? Maybe one person has a physical or a mental disability and the other person does not. Maybe both people have disabilities. So I just think that the way in which we teach young people and old people and people in between, the way that they can live happy and healthy lives needs to be inclusive, needs to be pleasure centered, needs to be medically accurate, and needs to be inclusive of all people. I hope that I answered all of your questions.
No, you did. You literally touched on everything. That was perfect. That was really helpful. And I think it's important to like recognize all of those different things. I mean, some of the things you just mentioned in terms of like showing pictures of vulvas that are different colors, like I wouldn't even have thought of that. And in looking back now on the sex ed curriculum that I received, and I would say mine was even like better theoretically. I'm from Connecticut, so I feel like we had a little bit more of an open dialogue about it. But even thinking back now, there were definitely things that could have been super improved. I think teachers need, like, it depends on who's teaching it. I think that is super important too, because if you just have the gym teacher doing it, and I mean, maybe the gym teacher is super woke about sex ed, if that's the case, amazing. But if not, then maybe bringing in a professional. I don't know exactly what that looks like. Would that be like a teacher or someone like you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Ideally, experts like me who are sex educators want there to be sex education throughout a student's career. So every year there's new topics and new information to be learned. But that isn't the reality. The reality is exactly like you said. It's either a gym teacher, or if people are lucky, someone coming in who is teaching comprehensive sex ed. And if they're unlucky, it's someone coming in teaching them abstinence only or really shameful pieces of sex education. Fat Megan Fox says, my sex ed was always very reproductive centric. When and how do you have the conversation about sex in terms of pleasure? Like, that's an excellent question, because most people, whether you're the gym teacher or you're the person coming in, don't have enough sessions. And so, I experienced this where I was asked to come in to teach 11th and 12th graders, and I only have 3 sessions with each grade. When you have 3 sessions with each grade and you want to try to gauge what information the students want, often schools have a big problem with teachers talking about masturbation and pleasure. So us sex educators, even if we have good intentions, we are, restricted by the boundaries of the school, of the administration. And so again, ideally, it would be someone permanent who's a health teacher who is trained in comprehensive, non-judgmental, pleasure-centered, medically accurate sex education, who would be able to teach to all of the students in whatever grades that they are or have learned to teach that in. But that, again, is not the reality of our situation.
Yeah, no, for sure. I really liked in the podcast how it like brought light to that, and it talked about how in a lot of early education situations, it's like all of the parts are the same, right? Like they're just structured differently, and that's something that I wouldn't have even necessarily considered. But like talking about it more in that, like, I think I was really scared after my sex ed talk. It was very much like, you're gonna get all the STIs, you're gonna get pregnant, and like, I mean, whatever, if that happens, like, not the end of the world. But at the same time, like, you're right, I think the focus on like how your body actually works, like where those areas of pleasure are, because like I know so many people my age who like don't know what the clitoris is, which is really sad. So I think I mean, all the stuff you touched upon was great, so thank you. Switching gears a little bit, so we wanted to ask you a little bit about like your thoughts on ways to kind of talk about consent and explore your sexuality safely. And then again, kind of a 2-part question after that, if we could go into like brief explanation of some of the different types of sexualities. Like, again, something really loved about the documentary was how it talked about people who are asexual and demisexual, which were 2 terms that like I really didn't know much about. So if we could even talk about how to, I guess, like explore those and kind of figure out like where you're at on the spectrum, because spectrum's huge.
Yes,
which is awesome.
It totally is. Yeah, let's start with consent. So
perfect.
Consent, for those of you who are watching, you've probably heard this term. Unfortunately, I think with the Me Too movement coming, in popularity, more people than ever are familiar with consent and sexual assault and what those things mean. But just so we're on the same page, consent is, in its simplest form, an agreement to do something. And of course, it is more nuanced than that. It means that it is freely given and then you're not coerced into it, you're not forced. It's reversible. So if I say yes 1 second and then think about it a little more deeply and then decide no, whoever I'm with needs to respect that no and know that they don't have my consent anymore. It needs to be an enthusiastic yes and a very clear yes. And a tricky part about consent is that technically and legally, you cannot consent to a sexual act if you are under the influence of drugs and alcohol. But it's really important to know that if you're someone who is watching this and someone who has gone to college or has been a teenager, you know that people are having sex while they're drinking and while they're doing drugs. So I think it's super important to talk about the fact that that's going to happen and how do we navigate that? How do we discuss that? Because it is tricky and it is a gray area. But I think my best piece of advice is to really know your boundaries as much as you can. And when you are consuming drugs and alcohol, to be conscientious and think about the fact that, oh, maybe tonight, like I'm just going to make the decision either to have my friends like kind of look out for me and or to know that like if I want to like hook up with someone, the most I'm going to do is make out with them or, something where you're in a state of mind where you're aware and you have your faculties before you become, involved with drugs and alcohol or one or the other. And so you kind of have a sense for what your boundaries are. Now, if you are in a relationship and if you all know each other really well, my advice is obviously going to be very different than if you are on a first date. So I think like if you and your partner know each other super well and know your boundaries and know the ways in which that you communicate verbally and non-verbally, like trust your judgment, trust yourself, trust your partner. But I think it's super important to remember that when you're in a new situation or an unfamiliar situation, you have to look out for yourself first and foremost. And if you have a community of people around you who is willing to help out in terms of making sure that you're safe and that you're healthy, that is always super important because at the end of the day, people do assault other people and people do commit acts of violence against other people. And it's really important to know how to protect ourselves as best as we can. And in the meantime, teach people not to assault, teach people not to hurt other people. I never want to seem like we're blaming the survivor, but I do think at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to be as safe as we can. And moving on to sexuality, I think it's a really good question. I think my friend and I were talking about this, just how there were so many pieces of the TikTok algorithm for us when we first started on TikTok that like fed us like videos that we were bisexual. And I feel like it's so funny because it's very true of just kind of like, did TikTok make me gay or like what is going on here?
It's a good question.
I think many people have experienced this kind of very fun phenomenon of like questioning their sexuality and questioning this box that they have put themselves in for their whole lives, myself included. And so I think that in terms of the question, how do you know how you identify and who you are? I really want folks to embrace the fact that sexuality is fluid. And as you said, it's on a spectrum. And there are a lot of opportunities for you to label yourself if you want to, and if that feels comfortable, and not do that. If that feels like it's too restrictive or you're putting yourself in that box that you don't want to put yourself in. And the two terms that you said, asexual and demisexual, so my understanding, and I don't identify with either of these things. So if anyone is watching and you identify as that, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, let us know.
You're the expert, but my understanding and my, research and education shows that if you identify as demisexual, maybe you can't form, a physical attraction to someone or have sex with them or, play with them in a sexual way until there are emotional or romantic feelings first. So that's a spectrum as well. And asexuality is also a spectrum. ACE for short is if you are someone, and there's also aromantic. So if you are someone who, is on that spectrum, maybe you are not interested in sex or you're not interested in masturbation if you're asexual. But again, it really depends on where you're at in the spectrum. And the same thing for if you're aromantic. If you're aromantic, maybe you're on the spectrum of, I'm not interested in having a romantic partner. I'm maybe only interested in sex, or maybe you can be both aromantic and asexual, which means you're really not interested in any of the sort if you're all the way on one side of that spectrum.
Yeah. No, I think that's something that I remember when I was watching, I think it was Sex Education. Yeah, I think it was Sex Education on Netflix.
Great show.
So good. Probably my favorite show on Netflix. I remember a conversation about that when one of the kids was like figuring out kind of where he was at. And someone was saying, well, at the end of the spectrum is fully straight, fully not straight. But there's so many things in between. So it's cool. And I mean, I had before like demisexual. I had seen it on TikTok, of course.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is that? But it's not new. I mean, I'm sure these things have been around. It's just no one really necessarily talked about it before, the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
I feel before, but I feel like the Gen Zs are really bringing. I'm a Gen Z, so I feel like I can joke about it. But no, for sure. And I really like what you said about consent and how it's, of course, it's never on the victim, but I think, I mean, it's unfortunately, because all these situations are so common, like you do have to take action to protect yourself. And I really like what you said about setting boundaries before the date. I think like in just talking with me and my friends, like, women in their early 20s, specifically going on dates with men, realizing that if we had kind of set those boundaries beforehand, we probably would have gotten out of a lot of situations. So, and again, not to blame the victim whatsoever, but I think sometimes it is taking a step back and being like, okay, like what do I really want? And if you do want to go and have sex with the person, if both parties are down, like that's fine too. But if you're not, then it's, being honest with yourself and realizing that it's okay to not do that too. So
yeah. And I just want to add, like, if you are in the moment and you are feeling disempowered, like you are not able to, negotiate for a condom or, advocate for what you want, you have every right to put your clothes on and walk out the door. And I know that that's not easy, and it's definitely not safe for everyone who's attempting to do that. So I don't want to minimize that. But if you are, oh, thank you so much, Amanda H. So nice. That's so sweet. So nice. Yeah. So if you feel like safe and you feel comfortable and you are not feeling like you're getting pleasure and happiness and joy out of the sexual situation that you are in, which is, if that's what you want out of it, you can get up and you can leave. Like that person does not need defending, and you are more important, and your safety and your body and your pleasure is way more important than their feelings.
Yeah, no, 100%. I remember my mom once told me after like a bad date situation that I had was like, you don't owe these people anything, like other than just who you are and what you are bringing to the table. And yeah, you never have to feel like you have to do anything. And it's so hard when you're in the situation too. Like I'm speaking hypothetically, and it's like, no, I'm empowered. I'm going to know how to get out of these situations. But sometimes it's a little bit more mundane. Like we don't always expect these things to happen. So I think, again, like opening up the conversation and what you said before, just like teaching people to not assault other people. It should be common sense, but unfortunately, I don't know.
It should be. Yeah, I think we're working on it. And as sex educators, that's something that we always try to make sure is very clear, is that we need to teach people, predominantly cis men, not to assault other people. And that is one of the most important ways to discuss that when we're talking about consent.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, anyone can engage in that, but right. I mean, I think with the cis men, unfortunately, that is a big population that, we really need to target. It's good. I think like, it's really fun now having conversations now that I feel like I'm a little bit more educated, and working with Pandia Health has been so beneficial, and talking with so many different professionals. But yeah, spreading the conversation and not being afraid. I mean, shout out to, I forget your name, Amanda, for that comment, for saying confidence. Like, yeah, it's okay to talk about these topics, and obviously, read the room. But I don't always do that. Sometimes I'm like, hey, and I'm like, maybe I should have a little bit of a filter when I'm like at work. But at the same time,
I mean, you work for a birth control company. I think it's fair.
I'm also a personal trainer, so I
Oh,
sometimes I'm
nice.
like, maybe like I should, I don't know what these other trainers are, what their perspective is, but you know, when we do have these conversations, it's really fun and it's just a good time to talk about things, and maybe other people have different perspectives that you don't know about. And I work with two males, and even hearing their perspectives coming from a more like religious standpoint is really cool too. I mean, it's just things that I wouldn't have thought about, and it's really nice to have all of that information. So, and it's, you know, it goes back to the science, but at the same time, I feel like it's just expanding every day.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
it's really awesome. And that's why like it's so great to have people like you who aren't afraid to talk about these things and kind of start the conversation. And yeah. So next question. This one's for the girlies or anyone who has a uterus, or I guess specifically like a vulva and a clitoris. We say with Pandia, people with uteri, but this one is like specific to the vulva. So, which by the way is different from the vagina. It's a little confusing, but you know, we can break that down if needed. But
Oh, I think it's simple. Yeah, we could easily talk about that after.
perfect. Yeah, I know. It's sometimes like there's a line in Big Mouth, another great show, where it's in the first episode and the kids, they're in middle school and they're watching a like a movie on the reproductive system, and they say like the egg passes from the fallopian tubes to the uterus, and the two boys in the class are like, uterus, I thought girls had vaginas, and they're like, yeah, I guess they don't. It's just like, it's so funny how these things start. It's like you hear something and you're like, wait, what? But yeah, there's a lot. I watch way too much TV, but Big
I
Mouth,
also love Big Mouth, love sex education,
so
human
good.
resources. There's a lot we can discuss
Oh my god,
TV
human
wise.
resources, love it. But anyway, so how do we emphasize specifically female pleasure in a world that I feel like is more focused on men?
Yeah, so to break down the difference between the vulva and the vagina first. So I think growing up, we just thought of there's a penis for people with penises, and there's a vagina for people with vaginas. Usually we would learn penis, boy, vagina, girl. I think now we are opening up that idea and understanding of the fact that your biological sex does not equal your gender
Mhm.
and does not necessarily mean they are one and the same. And so a vulva is the all encompassing organ that has the vagina, it has the, inner labia, outer
Mhm.
labia, the clitoris, the pubic mound. It's basically the whole package. So that's the difference between the vulva and the vagina, whereas the vagina is really just like the canal, the tube, where period blood comes out of, where a baby can come out of, where a penis can go inside, or a tampon can go inside, or a finger, or a sex toy. And so I think that is super important
Mm.
to know. And the fact that the clitoris, speaking of pleasure, is a really, really powerful and incredible organ that doesn't get enough credit.
Mhm.
And I think the way that we start to discuss pleasure for people with vulvas is by talking about it in sex ed and by talking about it in the media and by showing more realistic portrayals of what it's like for cis women and for people with vulvas to orgasm, to feel pleasure. As you may or may not know, 70 to 80% of people with vulvas need clitoral stimulation in order to
Mhm.
reach orgasm. And so I think that's a really important fact, right? Like we act like through the media, we kind of portray people with vulvas, cis women as orgasming the first moment that the man's penis enters her vagina. And like
Mhm.
we know that that's not true for,
Mm-mm.
80%, upwards of 80% of, yeah, mind blown, Fat Megan Fox, that's right. Of 80% of women and people with vulvas don't orgasm like that. And even if people are orgasming from vaginal penetration alone, the G spot is actually not really like scientifically real. You'll learn about
Mhm.
this in the principles of pleasure. Yeah, porn, right? So like
Mhm.
porn is entertainment, is a performance. It's not a representation of real life sex. So again, I do think the way that we start to normalize and uplift pleasure for people with vulvas is by talking about it, by showing it in the media, by showing it in porn, by having conversations with our partners, by masturbating, by figuring out what we like through sex toys, through audio porn, through visual porn, and having conversations like this and tuning into conversations like this and really just chatting about it with our friends, really making sure that people know that it's not taboo to want pleasure, because we know through research and through science that masturbation and orgasm, even though orgasm doesn't need to be the final, be all end all of sex, have a lot of health benefits, not including but not limited to sleeping better, lowering your stress, like improving your blood flow, increasing endorphins and like dopamine and making you physically happier. And it just feels really good. So like that's also enough of a reason to want to do it. So yeah, I hope that was helpful.
No, that was really helpful. It's so funny. I think with masturbation, people are so afraid to talk about it, and like, I don't know. I remember when I bought a vibrator, and I was like, oh my god, this is like so like gotta make sure it's in like discreet packaging, all of that. Which Adam and Eve, by the way, if anyone is interested, I think they're the number one company for like all different types of sex just products in general, and it comes in very discreet packaging. Not that that's something we necessarily like should be discouraged by, but it's such, unfortunately, a taboo topic. And of course, like, it's your own body, you never have to talk to anyone about it if you don't want, but I feel like there's so much shame associated with it, and especially with women. Like, it just, I mean, I guess I can't say this for everyone, but just in my own experience and anecdotally, it is scary to, like, men typically, I'm not speaking for all, I feel like, have that experience of pleasure faster. And so like, I think a lot of the time it's like, okay, we have sex and then the guy finishes, and it's like, okay, but like, what about me? Like, what if what, I can't even believe I'm talking to the internet about this, but but like, right, like, it shouldn't be something that you're afraid to keep exploring. If kind of a follow-up question for you, what would you, maybe what advice would you have for someone who is kind of like embarrassed or ashamed to start masturbating?
Yeah, I'll answer Fat Megan Fox's question
Thanks,
first.
Claire.
Feminist porn, there's Dipsy out there, which I really recommend. They are audio porn company. They're an app. They're fantastic if you're interested in that. There's also queer centered porn. I'm blanking on the name right now, but there's a performer called Jizz Lee, Jizzlee. So if you Google that name, I think you'll find it. But I think Bellesa also has feminist porn.
They do, yes.
I've never used them personally or used their app, but I've heard really good things. But yeah, start there. We also, if you, Fat Megan Fox, go to our website, sexheadwithdb.com, and you check out the articles that we were featured in. We did a collab with Emoji Baiter during Masturbation May a couple years back about like how to find feminist porn. So yeah, Megan V. Carr agrees, and Bellesa. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. And to answer your question about how you can feel like less shame about masturbation, I think there's a lot of unlearning that potentially you can do if you're one of those people. And it's really like an internal dialogue that maybe you start with yourself of like, if you're feeling horny or in the mood, like telling yourself like, this is normal, this is natural, I deserve pleasure. Like some sort of mantra could be really helpful for you. And then really just like understanding that like sexual wellness is part of health. It's part of your overall health. It's just like if you feel better after exercising or eating well or whatever you feel most happy, like sexual pleasure is totally part of that package. So really like start to think about that and experiment, like use sex toys, try different things that might feel good, experiment with porn, experiment with partners, and see how it goes.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love how like kind of casually you spoke about that, because again, I guess it's a big deal in some aspects, specifically when you are with a partner, but at the same time, when it's with yourself, I feel like that's when you can kind of explore and just have fun because it's like your own body, which is really cool. And I know this probably, I don't know if this is like the best tip. It probably, because we do not promote alcohol on this channel, especially if you're underage. But I remember one of my friends told me when I was like really scared after I bought my vibrator and I was like, I don't want to use it. I don't know what to do. She was like, girl, like have a glass of wine, like set the scene, whatever that means for you. If that means a glass of wine, you know, be safe, alcohol, obviously. But I don't know, lighting a candle, like kind of setting your safe space.
Music.
And I remember, yes, music for sure. And I remember talking to someone too about people who have been through sexual assault and kind of like getting back into feeling pleasure, which is a whole other topic we could discuss maybe in a future live. But again, like understanding that that is not always the case. Like you can feel safe during sex. Like, so kind of figuring out whether it's like a smell or like something that just makes you feel relaxed, and seeing, like kind of experimenting with what that is. I thought that was a really helpful tip.
Totally.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's the case for so many people. Even if you haven't experienced sexual assault, I feel like sometimes it's just hard to turn your brain off. Like I mean, I live in a city, you live in a city, so like I feel like we're always like go go go, and when it's finally just like okay, like me time, it's really hard to like turn that off and think, you know, no, I deserve to like feel good and have this reaction. In the documentary, there was a whole, I think it was the second episode, I haven't watched the third one yet, but in the second episode there was a whole study about how having orgasms could like prevent so many health issues like migraines, so many different things. And I was like, this is actually really cool science. And I remember the person who was doing the research was saying, okay, my AirPods are dying. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, she was saying how if, like, you know, medicine is always going to be around and always going to be important, but maybe if we could learn how to treat some mental health or just physical disorders with maybe not masturbation, but just, I don't know, sexual health in general, it could be super beneficial. So
totally.
yeah, I love that. I have one more question for you. I know we're a little over time, but I just want a personal question, I guess, kind of. What got you so interested in talking about sex and sexual health, and so much so to kind of like create your own brand around it?
Yeah, so it's kind of a twofold thing for me. One, my mom is an OBGYN, so I grew up really, you know, being comfortable with learning about women's sexual health and reproductive health from a very young age, and really felt like it was a very exciting way to have a conversation at the dinner table. It was very kind of like, you know, it was just not awkward and like exciting for me to talk about those topics. And then another story, which you again could read more in depth if you check out our website, sexedwithdb.com, and check out the homepage. There's a link to like a longer form article about this aha moment that I had. But long story short, I was teaching English in Israel for a year after I graduated from college, and had just like a wild, really sexist experience with a rabbi there, who was telling me about like his daughters and just like being super sexist about it. And I just had like a very visceral reaction to that. And it made me really want to, you know, make my career all about sexual health and sex education. And yeah, the podcast was born about 5 years ago and haven't looked back.
That's amazing. You can still hear me?
Yes.
Take the AirPods out. Perfect. I love that. Wait, also, are you Jewish?
I am Jewish.
Oh, me too. I haven't been to Israel, but I couldn't tell with your last name, but I don't know. Sometimes you can tell.
It is a Jewish last name.
Are you Israeli?
Yeah, kind of. My dad was born in Afghanistan, actually. So we're Afghani Jews, but then he moved to Israel when he was young, and I have a lot of family there. And then he moved to America when he was like in his mid-20s.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that's so funny you mentioned that because I remember when I watched Unorthodox on Netflix.
Such a good show.
Yes, and it was
I mean, there was a big portion about it of how sex is so focused on males and just the idea of like having babies, and how the girl in it, like when she kind of had a positive sexual experience, she was like so mind blown. And I just thought that, yeah, that was very interesting. I feel like, oh, we could again do a whole other podcast or video on sexual health and religion. We actually have a blog on it, pandiahealth.com. Check that out. And because I mean, there are a lot of religions in general that don't condone sex for fun, but
Right.
moving out of it. And I feel like even in Judaism, I'm not the best practicing Jew at the moment. We're working on it, but I feel like, especially with like modern Orthodox, we are becoming a little bit more progressive, which I feel like is pretty cool. Again, it kind of all depends on where you're located. I'm more reformed, conservative. We're pretty chill, but yeah, I think that's a whole other topic we could discuss.
Totally. Yeah. Also, I just want to answer that question. The podcast is available on all streaming platforms, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Please follow us on Instagram at Sex Ed with DB Podcast, on Twitter and TikTok at Sex Ed with DB, and on Facebook at Ed with DB. You can also find us on YouTube. And we come out with podcast episodes every Wednesday, so there'll be a new one tomorrow. Yeah, check us out, follow us. If you like my content and want to support me, I do this work full time. So we have a Patreon with a lot of fun prizes. I get a lot of free sex toys that I send to my patrons. So if that's something you're interested in, that would be awesome. And if not, like, feel free to tune in. And thank you so much for joining.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, Fat Mac and Fox is Claire. She's our other social media.
Oh, nice.
Our little guru. She actually manages our TikTok, so shout out to her.
Oh, nice.
Love her username, and she actually does look like Megan Fox. But and then Megan is on here too. Megan Van Carr. Vercelli's Carr. She is also on our social media team. So shout out to you guys. I think Sam is on here too. She's my intern. Love that. She honestly should be more than an intern though, because she manages me. So yeah, I found her from home. Well, not found her. We were already kind of friends, and she's very into sexual health. And I was like, you want to be my assistant?
Amazing.
So yeah, shout out to all of you for joining. Shout out to Susanna for helping set this up. She was actually the person who put me in contact with you. She's our COO. So yeah, and I'm trying to think. I really, you answered all of my questions. I'm probably going to think of more after I watched Principles of Pleasure, and when I finish it, I'm probably going to have more questions. So I will.
Yeah. Please hit me up. Let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So nice meeting you, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and have a great night.
Yes, thank you all so much. Follow Danielle, follow Pandia Health, and we will see you soon. I don't know when, but soon.
Okay.
Next Trendy Tuesday.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Danielle. Bye.